When Eric and Michelle told me about this week of fasting and prayer you were having and asked if I would be willing to join, my first reaction was, yes, sure, why not? But then 2 days later, I was overwhelmed. And I thought, Lord, I can't do this. Why in the world would I try to do something? And to pick humility of all things. But the Lord said to me, you need to pick this because it's what you need, Carol Ann. And when anybody calls me Carol Ann, I know I'm in trouble. So here we go. I'll do what the Lord has laid on my heart to do. I very much appreciated the wonderful introduction that was given by Eric. But, those things that's not really the important thing. That we do the things that God lays in our hearts to do. We try the best we know how to fulfill the tasks he's given us to do. But I was reminded of an article I read years ago. Campus Crusade used to have a magazine called Campus Life. And there was an article by this young man. He was a missionary to Africa, and he had come home on furlough. And it happened to be Wednesday when he arrived in his small town. And so he decided he'd slip into the prayer meeting that he knew was going on at his church. And so he just slipped in quietly and knelt down beside someone he knew, just in time to hear this man pray. And dear Lord, bless what's his name out there in Africa. And he realized his guy was praying for him, but he couldn't even remember his name. But Lord, bless what's his name out there in Africa. And he went on in the article to say, when you're praying for missionaries, you don't need to be praying for them necessarily to be blessed. They are blessed by doing what they're doing. In my case, overwhelmingly so. What you need to pray for your missionaries, that God will give them strength and wisdom and opportunities and force, insight to know how to deal with opportunities and courage, and these days specifically for courage for people. It's a scary world out there, but we are blessed. And I think I should go back to say, by telling you a little bit who I am. I was born in Pennsylvania, where my parents were pastoring at the time. And I am deeply grateful to the Lord for the privilege of being born in America, being an American citizen, whatever our problems are in this country. And believe me, I'm shocked at what's going on here, but it's nothing compared to the rest of the world. We are so privileged to be Americans and to be here and to have what we have. So I'm grateful. I'm really grateful to be born and to be an American citizen. But my parents went to India when I was 5. Well, not quite 5. I hadn't had my 5th birthday yet. And I loved being in India. India was a joy for me from the time we first got there. And it was a joy for me forever that I lived there. And when I had to leave at the age of 18 to come back to the United States for university, I really left my heart in India. So though I'm an American and grateful to the Lord for that, India will always be the nation of my heart. And that was in the 60s when I had to come home for college, and my parents could go back, but I couldn't go. Once you're 18, you had to have your own visa. And in those days, India and America never got along well. I mean, India had joined the non-aligned movement with Russia. And so that was just anathema to America. They weren't about to have partnership with a country that was, in cahoots with Russia. And so there was no way, there was no possibility that I could have ever got a visa to go back to India on my own. And so you do what you think the Lord wants you to do. When my parents left, I had finished high school, I went to nurses training. Then I felt the Lord was leading me into some kind of ministry. So I left nursing and I went to Bible college. And while I was in Bible college, I studied Spanish for 4 years to give the Lord some options. Oh, we of little faith. But I felt that the Lord, I wanted there to be openings. If it couldn't be India, let it be somewhere, that I had options. And, but I want to say, nothing that you do, if you're really trying hard to walk in the path that the Lord leads you, none of that's ever wasted. The Lord has a reason that he's made me study Spanish. And when we finally get around to finishing the biography, you'll know why. But anyway, my parents were back in India. I'm in the States. I finished my BA. Um, and then my parents came home. And in those days, you didn't just get on a plane and go visit your parents. It didn't happen. I think in the 5 years they were gone, we had a conversation on the phone twice. And both times it was some kind of a family crisis, that they needed to know about. So I hadn't seen my parents in 5 years, and there's a lot of catching up to do, but it wouldn't matter where the conversation began. We would end up with this guy they'd met in India, this New Zealander, this young missionary that they'd met. And he was a remarkable guy. He was a Kiwi. He was close friends of some of their best friends. So they had met him. And long and short of it was he needed a wife. He needed a wife who was willing to work in India. So after this had gone on for a while, I said to my dad, alrighty, what's going on? And my dad said, well, I've met the ideal husband for you. And so I've proposed to him and offered him a dowry. And if my mother had said to me, I have found you a husband, I might have been a little reluctant because I love my mother dearly, lovely, sweet, marvelous lady, but anybody she'd picked out have walked all over. But when my dad said, I have found you the right husband, I said, okay, all right. And so basically I had agreed to marry this man sight unseen. And I've said to people since, if we had ever courted each other in the normal way, we would never have married. We're too different. We wouldn't have got past the second date. I'd have been scared spitless. But Graham was everything that I needed in a husband. He was mature. He was serious. He was driven. He was focused. He knew beyond a doubt that the Lord had called him to India. And so that's where he was going to go. And he had come back to the United States to do some further study because he wasn't qualified even to teach on our own seminary where he'd been working in Madras for 2 years with OMS. And so he decided to come to the US because you have, number one, Christian university colleges. Number two, you have summer school. So he came to California to study at Azusa Pacific College. I was in Virginia finishing my Master of Science degree in education. And he came to my graduation one Saturday night, and the next Saturday we were married. And my parents had to leave for India within 2 weeks. And so the next time I saw them was 2.5 years later after Graham had finished his BA and his MA. Then we went back to India together to Madras Bible Seminary. And I have to say, the Lord knows what he's doing. I had my master's degree and my teaching credential before Graham finished his BA, but I never needed to teach. I never needed my own office. I never needed some career. What I am is a Martha person. I'm absolutely a Martha person. I like to entertain people. I like to cook for them. I like to take care of them. And the Lord knew what my gifts were and what Graham needed. And so the Lord was able to allow me to do the things that he prepared me for all my life and to be a help to Graham at the same time, to be an enhancer for his career. He never had to worry about looking after the visitors. He never had to worry about entertaining the visiting professors. He never had to worry about the banking or the postage or whatever. I did it because that was my job. And so he was free to get on with what the Lord had for him to do, which was incredible, amazing. But brings me today. That's why I wanted to say, blessed. I have been blessed beyond anything I could have ever asked or imagined. God is great and gracious and kind. And when he calls us, he does enable us to do that. So we spent more than 45 years in India. We tried to retire twice. We came back, Graham stepped down as the principal of SciEx in 2005. We moved to New Zealand, which we thought would be our home. But Cushy married an American, stayed in America. And so she began saying to us, when you're done with India, because we were still going back to India, we'd go back to India 3-4 times a year. In the meantime, we were teaching in China and Peking University, helping to set up a Christian studies program in the Department of Philosophy and Religion. And so we had all these things going on. And then in 2012, we got an invitation from the Evangelical Fellowship of India to say, would you come back to India and help us to try to set up Caleb in North India, which is a similar institute to SAIAC's, but designed specifically for North Indians and for the North Indian culture. And we said, oh, yes. And for me, you can't imagine what a joy that was, because I was going back to where I grew up as a child, going back to my mom and dad worked in Lucknow, and I had to go through Dehradun all the time to get to school in Missouri. So here we are going back to where I grew up as a child, and I couldn't think of anything I would like better. But, sometimes with your best intentions, you don't succeed. And it was the first time we put our mind to something and all of our energy and blood, sweat, and tears, and it seemed to be a failure. Nothing seemed to work. We rented buildings, we hired staff, we found a place we could use it temporarily for the school. But immediately that people started applying to come, the first question was, who's going to accredit you? And that's a fair enough question. If you're doing a graduate program, who accredits you is very important. Does the degree you're offering have any value? And so that was obstacle number one, who is going to accredit us? So we were in touch with people who were in a university in Allahabad. Some of our graduates were on their faculty. And the chancellor of the university in Allahabad, it started out as the Agricultural Institute, but it became a university recognized by the government. And they had a Christian department. And Dr. Lal said to us, we would love to accredit you, but we can only accredit in the state of UP, Uttar Pradesh. So would you move here to do this? Well, Dr. Richard Howell agreed, and we said, sure, why not? So we picked up bag and baggage, and including the secretary who decided to join with us and come with us to a place called Raebareli, where they wanted to give us a piece of land. And we did everything we possibly knew how to get the program started, but we couldn't get faculty. We couldn't recruit anyone. It was a village out in the middle of, when India, you can't imagine the vastness of the population. When I grew up in Lucknow, it was 400,000 people. Now it's 10 million. The city extends over places where my father used to go hunting when I was a child, where he'd go hunting for, nilgai, lubul, and black buck, and chinkara, and all these things. It was a wilderness. And now it's just solid city. And we were 80 kilometers away in this place called Raebareli. But our secretary said to Graham one day, she said, sir, she said, if you have women students here, we'll just be prisoners on the campus. There's no way we can go into town or move around. It's too dangerous for us physically. And we couldn't recruit faculty for the same reason. There was no English medium school for their children. There was no English medium church for their children to go to. And so we actually realized we were not going to succeed. And we left there really feeling that we had failed, totally failed. And for Graham, it was the first time in his life, I think he'd ever even contemplated walking away from something that he really believed the Lord had given him to do, but he couldn't do it. It wasn't going to happen. And so we went back to New Zealand in 2016. And this was when Kushi said to us, I think you need to come and live near me so that I can look after you in your old age. Well, we were getting there. And so we moved from New Zealand to the US in 2016 in September. We were able to buy a home. We had a home in New Zealand, which we sold. We were able to buy a home in Belfast, near where Kushi lives. But just about that time, we started noticing Graham changing. First, it was just short-term memory things. What did we do yesterday? Or what did I have for breakfast? Or who was that we're sitting with in church? And little things where his memory began to go. And then bit by bit, it became more serious that he couldn't remember people in New Zealand. But for a long time, he could remember everything that was going on in India. We would get letters from them, or we would talk on the phone, and he knew who they were. But bit by bit, all that began to disappear. And so Kushi and I began to realize the day would come when Graham needed to be in some kind of a memory care unit. And there wasn't one in Belfast where we were. So we found a place an hour away, in a place called Orono, where the University of Maine is, called Dirigo Pines. And she and I came up and had a look, and it was this charming village, about 20 double units. I mean, like attached houses, duplexes. And plus they also have apartments for people who are more dependent to live in the inn. And they had a memory care unit. And so we moved. We sold our house in Belfast, and the Lord was gracious. We got a wonderful price. We sold the house in 24 hours and we moved. We got rid of anything that wasn't going to fit. And we moved to a house about the third of the size where we were. So we sold what we could. We gave away more stuff and we moved. But the minute we moved, Graham started to fall to pieces. He would wake up in the morning and have no idea who I was. And he wouldn't cooperate with, I think because of not knowing who I was. And so who is this person trying to manage my life? Became very stressful for him and very difficult. And he became very physically aggressive. And I mean, at first you think, oh, come on, this is gonna pass. But when it got to the point where twice he really physically injured me and I had to call the police, I had to put him into memory care. And so he was only about 5 minutes away in a building nearby. And it was a lovely unit, lovely people. And I would go up and have a meal with him at least once a day. But he wouldn't settle in. Every time I'd go, he'd packed up everything he owned and was ready to go home. Just everything, his clothes, his pictures, everything, just put them in a suitcase or even a pillowcase, just wanting to come home. So they said to me, we think you need to go away for a few weeks. Let him settle in, let him get adjusted without seeing you. So I went down to Virginia to be with my sister, whom I hadn't seen in 3 years. And I came back after a month and I was just heartbroken. I was totally heartbroken. He hadn't shaved in a month. His clothes were not clean. He was very erratic in his behavior. Worst of all, every time I would go, he would have had an accident and I'd have to clean him up, which had never happened at home. And so I said, that's it. Can't do this. I'm taking him home. There again, talk about pride. These people had 24-hour staff, revolving staff, to look after him all the time. And I say, I can do better than this. So I brought him home to our house. And I realized that this may be the most important thing I ever have to do in my life. You know, I said the other day when I was giving this talk in the first place, I've been reading through Leviticus in my devotions in the morning. And all the sacrifices that the children of Israel were taught to do, all the offerings, many of them were the burnt offerings that they had to bring, a lamb without blemish or a young bull. And the meat and the fat were put on the altar as a burnt offering to the Lord. And the smell, the savor of that burnt offering was pleasing to the Lord. And I think that I'm starting to understand in a deeper way that the Lord doesn't care so much about what I do as who I am and who I'm becoming. We talk a lot about wanting to finish well, but what does that mean for me? What does that mean for Carol? What does that mean as I grow old? Does it mean that people say, oh, wow, weren't you wonderful? And you were in India 45 years and you started Sykes and you helped get Caleb established. That isn't what God cares about. None of that could have happened without him. Yes, we played our part. We did the best we knew how to do, but God cares who I am. Who I am. Am I becoming someone who shows the graciousness of the Lord? You know, the humility that was one of the topics on this week of prayer and fasting. It's one of the graces. The graces. And I think that's what the Lord wants us to become in our lives. I compared it with when I was little, small girl before we even went to India. my mother's mother, they were a family of 10. And you couldn't walk into their house without the smell of baking. It was the most beautiful aroma. Either bread or pies or muffins or cookies were baking. You never walked into their house without the smell of baking. It was just wonderful. And I think of other things. My father's mother, she was a Southerner, very Southern. You walk in her house and it was fried chicken or ham hocks or crab meat or fish, it was, but the smells, and to this day, if I walk past a certain smell, I know exactly. It just takes me to that place. Now that I'm here in Maine, you can walk through a balsam forest with a breeze blowing, and the smell is just overwhelming. And I think that's what God is wanting from us. Michelle doesn't know this probably, but one of the first times I ever met her and was in her home, I discovered that in her dining room, she had maybe 3 or 4 sets of most beautiful, exquisite bone china dishes. And when I was growing up, the epitome of elegance was to be served a dinner on bone china. But bone china is famous because it's so fine and so thin and so translucent, because it is actually animal bones crushed and crushed and crushed in a horrendous mortar with clay until there's nothing left but a cream and a paste. And because of that bone that's been crushed into the clay, it is strong enough to be molded into the most delicate and intricate shapes, and yet it's strong enough to eat off of and wash. And I've realized, looking after Graham now, and it's not going to get better, it's going to get worse. This is the crucible for me. This is what the Lord is saying to me, Carolyn, can you use this experience to become the woman of God that I want you to be? And so that's my prayer. Why do I get upset with you? Why do I get impatient? Why do I get upset? I wouldn't get upset with a 4-year-old, but I get upset with him. Shame on me. That isn't God's grace in me. That isn't humility. That isn't compassion. And that's what the Lord wants from me. So, God bless you all. Amen.